The day he was laughed at in uniform. Get your old tattooed arm off the counter. This ain't a war museum. That's the first thing Royce Halberd heard that morning at Harrison's Diner. It was Veterans Day in Huntington, West Virginia. Flags lined the lampposts. The bakery across the street gave out cupcakes with red, white, and blue icing. But inside the diner, where the smell of burnt bacon and old coffee filled the air, there was no flag, no banner, no welcome. Just that voice mocking loud and sharp enough to slice through 9 years of quiet routine. Royce didn't move. He had already unbuttoned the cuff of his flannel sleeve to reach his wallet. That's when the tattoo showed. Faded, black ink. Just 5 digits and a triangle, 3rd Recon USMC. The same ink he had bled with outside Da Nang in 1971. Across the counter stood Travis Kincaid, 29, assistant to the mayor and son of Deputy Mayor Philip Kincaid. He leaned against the register like it owed him something. Behind him were 2 city workers in bright orange vests, laughing into their sausage biscuits. Seriously, Travis snorted, "I've seen better ink on prison walls. You sure you didn't earn that in a bar fight, Grandpa?" The laughter spread like spilled coffee, uncomfortable but unstoppable. A retired high school teacher at Booth 4 chuckled into his cup. A woman in scrubs looked up and quickly looked down. No one spoke up. No one stood. Royce was 74. Tall, thin-weathered, his grey beard trimmed short, his eyes pale steel beneath brows that rarely moved. That morning he wore his usual coat, wool dark brown, patched at the elbows. His boots were polished, but the leather was cracked from time, not neglect. He didn't wear medals, he didn't speak of war, he just came in every morning at 7:03, sat at the same booth by the window and ordered black coffee with biscuits and sausage gravy. He looked down at his plate. The biscuit was cold. He didn't touch it. He just folded his napkin, laid it gently beside his cup, and stood up. His knees cracked faintly, a reminder of hills climbed and helicopters jumped from. He slid $2 bills under the salt shaker and reached for his coat. By the window, a 16-year-old girl named Lila Morgan watched everything. She sat alone, sketchbook, open pencil, frozen mid-line. She hadn't meant to stare, but her eyes had caught the tattoo, the numbers, the triangle. Something about it made her stop drawing coffee cups and start memorizing what she saw. Royce didn't glance back. He opened the door and a gust of cold air rushed in, scattering napkins off the tables. The bell above the door jingled light and familiar, but no one noticed. No one offered a hand or a word. Outside, the sidewalk was slick from last night's rain. Royce stood still for a second, then pulled up his collar and crossed the street toward the old VFW building. It was locked as always. He didn't even try the door anymore. Lila stood up, clutching her sketchbook. She looked around. No one said anything. Travis was already back on his phone. She slipped out quietly, the bell tinkling again. Royce was halfway down the block, his shoulders hunched against the wind. "Sir," she called. He stopped. She jogged up beside him, breath visible in the cold morning air. "Sir, what does your tattoo mean?" Royce looked at her. Not annoyed, just surprised. She was young. Brown hair tucked under a beanie. She wore a jacket too big for her and carried a messenger bag covered in little pins, band logos, National Honor Society, a tiny eagle. He studied her face, then said softly, "It means I came home." Some didn't. Leila didn't respond right away. She opened her sketchbook and showed him the drawing. It wasn't perfect, but it was careful. His arm, the numbers, the triangle. "I didn't want to forget it," she said. He looked at it for a long time. His eyes flickered once. "Most people already have." Before she could ask more, he tipped his hat and turned away, walking toward the woods behind the market. Now, let me ask you something. If you were sitting in that diner, if you saw a man mocked for something he never bragged about, would you say something? Would you stop the laughter, or would you sip your coffee and look away? Comment below. Would you have stood up that morning? Type honor matters if you believe that no veteran should be mocked for what they survived. And stay with us, because what Royce Halberd carries isn't just a tattoo, it's a code, a buried story, a forgotten promise, and tomorrow someone will finally remember. Cliffhanger. Lila holding the sketch, standing alone in the street, eyes following the silhouette of a man the town chose to ignore. What they didn't know about that ink. That's not just a tattoo, that's a Marine's blood code. Lila stared at the sketch in her notebook like it had started breathing on its own. The numbers weren't just numbers anymore. They carried weight, real physical weight. She could still see the way Royce had paused, not out of pride, but out of something heavier, regret maybe, or memory. She hadn't meant to follow him, but something about that quiet sadness on his face, like a man still walking through fog decades old, had pulled her in, and now she had a mission. By noon, she was at the Huntington Public Library, not with a book report or an overdue card, but with a question most kids her age never ask. Do military tattoos have codes in them? The front desk hadn't changed in 30 years. Neither had Mrs. Ethel Bowman, the head librarian. White bun, horn-rimmed glasses, sweater buttoned too tight. But when Lila showed her the sketch, the room changed. Mrs. Bowman's fingers froze on the keyboard. Her eyes narrowed. "I haven't seen that in a long time," she said softly. "Where'd you get it?" "It's a drawing," Lila said, "of a man I met this morning. His name is Royce Halberd." Mrs. Bowman leaned in. "He's still alive." That response hit harder than expected. She disappeared into the archives like a ghost, returning to haunt a house she once loved. Lila waited. 10 minutes. Then 15. The fluorescent lights above flickered once, then steadied. When Mrs. Bowman returned, she held a thin file folder in both hands like it contained something sacred. Inside, a grainy black-and-white photo from 1971. 4 Marines standing in front of a downed CH-46 helicopter. One of them, taller, leaner, younger, wore the same eyes Lila had seen that morning, hard but hollow, written in faded blue pen at the bottom, 3rd Recon, Broken Mirror op Danang. And next to it, underlined twice, Halberd RM. Bronze Star Ballier? Device. Lila's heart was thumping. "What's Operation Broken Mirror?" Mrs. Bowman sat down slowly. "Classified. At least it was. Rumor was they got left behind." Royce pulled out 3 wounded Marines on his own. Saved lives no one ever counted. Lila was stunned. "And no one talks about him. People don't like quiet heroes," the old librarian said. "They can't sell them in movies." At that moment, Lila knew what she had to do. She ran home and opened her laptop. She started something she called Project Honor, a digital file, scanned image, timeline, then a handwritten page titled The Man at the Window Booth. Before she finished, her mom knocked. "Dinner." "I'm working on something," Lila said. "It's Veterans Day," her mom replied. "Come eat." Lila looked back at the screen. The sketch, the photo, the untouched keyboard blinking. Then she grabbed her phone and opened the camera. "Hey," she said, recording. "If anyone knows Royce Halberd, tell him someone remembers." She posted it on a local community group. By 8 p.m., it had 342 views. By midnight, 200. And in the comments, one that froze her, "He saved my uncle in 71. I owe him my life." Lieutenant Colonel Meredith Vance, Retil. Now hold on. If you're still watching, you might be wondering, why does this matter? Because every small town has a Royce, A quiet man in the corner, carrying medals no one sees and scars no one asks about. If this story touches something in you, type I remember in the comments and let others know veterans aren't invisible. And if you want to hear what happened when Colonel Vance showed up in person, subscribe now and stay with us. What's coming next? No one in that diner expected. But back to Royce. The next morning, he didn't go to Harrison's diner. Instead, he stood outside the VFW building, not knocking, just staring at the locked door like it might finally open. Then something strange happened. A car pulled up, a black Ford Crown Victoria, government plates. A woman in her 60s stepped out, trim, composed, wearing civilian clothes but with the posture of someone who still stood at attention when the anthem played. "Royce Halberd?" she asked. He turned. "I'm Colonel Meredith Vance," she said. "You probably don't remember me, but I remember you." He blinked once, then looked down at her hand when she offered it. "You carried me," she said, "when my legs were shattered and the jungle was on fire. You told me, if you die, it won't be alone. Then you made it not true." Royce didn't answer. She reached into her coat and pulled out a photo, the same one from the library, only clearer. "You were more than a rescue," she said. "You were the reason I came home. And now, it's my turn." She didn't explain further, just nodded once and left. That night, Lila walked into the diner before closing. Travis was mopping the floor, earbuds in. He didn't see her at first. She walked up to the bulletin board near the bathrooms and tacked something up. A copy of Royce's unit photo. Next to it, her sketch. She added a sticky note. "We forgot," but he didn't. Lana, wiping glasses behind the counter, noticed. She paused. "What's that?" she asked. "A start," Lila replied. "Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. It whispers through pencil lines and photos left on dusty boards. And justice was just getting started. So stay with us, because when Royce walks back into Harrison's diner tomorrow, he won't be walking in alone." Cliffhanger. A close-up on Lila's photo of Royce, now pinned to the board, slowly zooming out as the bell above the door jingles one last time that night. The colonel who walked in. She hadn't saluted in 12 years until she saw him. The bell above the door rang at exactly 6:59 a.m., the same cold metal jingle it had always made. But this time the entire diner fell silent. Royce Halberd stepped inside. Same wool coat, same flannel shirt. But today something was different. He didn't walk like a man blending in. He walked like someone who had been seen. Every pair of eyes watched him cross the floor to his booth by the window. Travis Kincaid, standing behind the counter, froze with a spoon still in his hand. Lila was already seated across the aisle, notebook, closed lips pressed tight. She nodded just once. But then Travis muttered under his breath, loud enough to land like a slap. "Well, look who's back. Guess the museum's open early." His two city buddies at the corner booth snorted into their breakfast plates. Royce didn't respond. He pulled out the booth seat and eased in, slowly setting his coat beside him. His tattoo, faded, distinct, peeked from under his sleeve again as he reached for the creamer. Lana behind the counter saw it too. She hesitated, then poured the coffee, placed it on a tray and started toward him. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were not. Before she could reach the table, the bell above the door rang again. Then again, and again, 4 people walked in, not dressed in uniform, but unmistakably military. Their posture, their silence, their shoes shined to mirror black. At the front was Colonel Meredith Vance. She wasn't wearing her ribbons today, but she didn't need them. Her presence filled the room like a commanding order never spoken out loud. Travis looked up, confused, then nervous. The men flanked her, standing still as stone just inside the entrance. The diner, usually buzzing with clinking cups and idle chatter, felt vacuumed of sound. The jukebox in the corner clicked to the end of a George Jones song and didn't cycle again. Colonel Vance stepped forward, her voice calm but strong. "Permission to stand?" "First Sergeant." She raised her hand to her brow, a slow, deliberate salute. Royce didn't move at first, his eyes locked with hers. There was history there, thick, unspoken. Then he gave the smallest nod, a breath of acknowledgement. It was enough. The colonel dropped her hand and turned to face the room. "This man," she said, her voice rising just enough to reach every corner of the diner, "carried me and 2 other Marines through jungle fire when we were abandoned in 1971. He lost half his blood, refused medevac until we were out. We lived because he didn't quit." Lana stood frozen, tray still in her hands. Lila sat up straighter, eyes wet, jaw tight. "Travis." Travis dropped the spoon. The clatter echoed. Someone near the window cleared their throat. Another lowered their coffee in silence. No medals on his chest. The colonel continued, "Because he never asked for any. No welcome banners. No parades. And yet he came in here every day and endured your silence, your jokes." She turned her gaze to Travis. "I believe you called his tattoo prison ink." Travis opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His face went pale, the kind of pale that doesn't come from fear alone, but from shame. "I didn't know," he finally stammered. Royce looked up for the first time. Calm. "Steady, steady. It was never about me," he said. "But you laughed at every man that didn't come home. You just didn't know their names." There was no anger in his voice. That made it worse. Colonel Vance turned back to Royce. "Would you mind if we sat with you?" Sergeant Royce nodded once. "Long as you don't talk politics before coffee." That line broke the tension. A few quiet laughs, uncertain at first, then real. The colonel and the 3 Marines slid into the booth. One placed a folded napkin on the table, then a medal on top of it. It was his. Bronze Star, with V device. Royce looked down, but didn't reach for it. Behind the counter, Lana placed the tray down and walked to the back. Moments later, she returned holding a manila envelope. Old, dusty. Inside was a photo. The same one from the library. She placed it on the counter, then picked up a pushpin from the register. Slowly she walked to the far wall near the bathrooms where local ads usually went and pulled them all down. Dog grooming, Zumba classes, yard sale flyers. One by one she cleared the space. Then she pinned the photo, then Royce's sketch, then the scan page Lila had printed the night before. A wall of honor born not from ceremony but from regret. Now here's the part I want you to remember. When Royce sat back surrounded by the only 3 people alive because of him, he didn't smile, he didn't cry, he didn't speak. He just looked across the diner at every single face, and slowly they began to stand, one by one. No orders, no fanfare, just dignity. If this moment means something to you, write. He earned our silence in the comments. And if you want to see what Royce does next, with the letter he's kept folded in his coat for 52 years, stay with us. Subscribe if you haven't already, because the story is just now unfolding. The bell over the door rang one final time that morning, and no one laughed after that. Cliffhanger. The camera holds on the medal resting on the napkin. Royce hasn't touched it yet, but something in his eyes says he might. The wall of quiet redemption. We forgot him for 40 years, and he still showed up every morning. The medal still sat untouched on the napkin. Royce didn't reach for it. Didn't even glance again after the colonel placed it down. As if to say, my job wasn't about medals, it was about lives. But the room had already changed. Lana's hands shook slightly as she pinned the last photo to the wall. The space beside the restrooms, once cluttered with coupon flyers and missing pet notices, now glowed with solemnity. A black and white photo of Royce's unit, the scanned Bronze Star citation, and Lila's pencil sketch all side by side, framed by reverence. No one dared look away. But then Royce stood, slowly, his back still straight, shoulders pulled back not out of pride, but discipline. He picked up the medal, held it in his hand like it weighed 100 pounds, and for a moment, just one flicker, his eyes closed. "I didn't carry them for this," he said quietly. "I carried them because I couldn't bury them." The silence broke as Lana whispered, Would you let us hang it?" Royce paused, then placed the medal gently into her hands. "If you're going to hang it," he said, "hang it next to the letter." Colonel Vance blinked. "What letter?" Royce reached inside his coat. An inner pocket deep and worn, lined in faded canvas. He pulled out a yellowed envelope, edges curled, sealed tight with brittle glue and time. "This," he said, "was given to me by a courseman named Ellie Torres. I was supposed to deliver it to her brother. I never found him." He laid the envelope on the table, then placed a photograph next to it. Ellie, young hair pulled back, laughing with two Marines, her uniform dusty but neat. "I kept it through Firestorm, 2 evacuations, and 51 winters," Royce said. "It belongs to someone. I just didn't know who." Lila leaned forward, eyes locked. "We can find him. We have the internet now." That brought the faintest smile to Royce's lips. "I didn't have Wi-Fi in Da Nang." A few people laughed gently, but the room still carried weight, the kind of weight that asks for stillness, not celebration. Across the diner, Travis hadn't said a word since the colonel's arrival. Now, hands in pockets, he walked slowly to the booth, his steps uncertain, his face pale. He stopped a foot away from Royce's table. "I was wrong," he said, voice raw. "All those days I said stupid stuff. I thought you were just some old guy with no story." Royce didn't respond, but his eyes held steady. "I can't fix it," Travis continued, "but I can shut up, and I can learn." He placed a folded napkin on the table. On it, in blue pen, 7 words, "Thank you for letting me see it." Royce looked down, nodded once. "Now let's stop for a second, because what just happened matters more than most people realize. Forgiveness doesn't shout. It doesn't explode with fireworks. It lands softly like a folded napkin on an old wooden table. If you believe forgiveness must follow truth, comment. Truth first below, and keep watching. The next 5 minutes might change what you think a town is capable of." Lana walked to the counter, picked up the envelope and photo, then pinned them beside the medal. Her hands didn't tremble this time. Then something unexpected. A woman stood up from the corner booth, early 60s gray hair in a bun, wearing a Veterans Affairs ID badge. "I'm Evelyn Rice," she said. "I work at the regional VA office." Royce tilted his head slightly. "I reviewed his file last year," she said. "It was marked incomplete. No contact address, no dependent file, no claim filed since 1998. She turned toward him. "You fell through the system, and I'm here to fix that." Royce blinked. "You got a form that covers 52 years? "No," she said, "but I have a voice, and I'm going to use it." The room fell silent again. Evelyn walked over, took his hand, and gave it a firm shake. "You're not invisible anymore." Royce looked down at her badge, then back at her face. "Don't say that unless you mean it." "I do," she said. "I mean every word." At that moment, Lila pulled out her sketchbook again, opened to a clean page, began drawing not just Royce, but the booth, the medal, the letter on the wall, the people standing, a moment frozen in graphite. I want to remember this forever, she whispered. The jukebox clicked back to life on its own, not loud, just soft static. Then a slow brass tune began, not country, the opening notes of the Marine Corps hymn. Royce looked at the machine, then turned to Colonel Vance. Did you do that? She smiled. No. But I like its timing. Across the room, two teenage boys who had been whispering near the door suddenly stood. They were ROTC cadets from the local high school. Hats off, backs straight. One gave a salute, the other followed. And Royce? He didn't return the salute. Instead, he did something none of them expected. He picked up Lila's pencil, turned her sketchbook gently toward him, and signed beneath the drawing. Royce M. Halberd, USMC, 3rd Recon Da Nang, 1907 and I. He handed the pencil back. That's for you, he said. So you remember to ask the second question. Lila looked puzzled. What second question? He smiled. Not just who someone is, but why they stayed silent. And with that, Royce stood. The room didn't clap. They just watched. Because redemption, when done right, doesn't beg for noise. It asks for reflection. He walked to the counter, paid in full, and left a folded bill that covered not just today's breakfast, but probably a week's worth. Lana watched him go, eyes damp. The bell above the door jingled softly behind him. And then came the part no one expected. On the sidewalk outside, a young man stood waiting, not in uniform, not in dress blues, but holding an envelope. He looked up, eyes brown, face familiar. Mr. Halberd, the young man asked. Royce stopped. My name's David Torres, he said. Ellie was my aunt. My mom gave me this last week. Said she never knew what to do with it. He held out the envelope. The return address, Huntington W.V. Royce's hand trembled not from age but something deeper. He opened the envelope slowly. Inside a photo of Ellie and a letter written in the same pen, same cursive as the one he had carried for 5 decades. Only this one said, if someone ever finds this, tell the man who carried me that I remembered him too. Cliffhanger. Royce folds the second letter and holds it to his chest. For the first time, a tear escapes his eye. He doesn't wipe it away. The boy who asked the right question, all it took was one kid and one question to bring back a nation's memory. Royce Halberd stood there on the sidewalk, the second letter pressed against his chest, eyes locked with a boy he'd never met, but somehow had always been waiting for. A single tear cut through the lines of his face. He didn't blink it away, he let it fall, because some truths don't belong to silence. They belong to the world. David Torres stood with his hands still out, unsure of what to say next. Royce looked at the envelope, then gently held the photo inside it, next to the one pinned on the diner's new wall of honor. Same eyes, same laugh. Time hadn't erased her, not entirely. She remembered, Royce said, his voice low but unshaken. She remembered. Lana had stepped outside to join them now, followed closely by Lila, who still clutched her sketchbook to her chest like it was a relic. Colonel Vance stood behind the window, watching, her eyes filled with that stillness only soldiers understand. Inside the diner, not a single fork touched a plate. Not a single word was spoken. The town was learning how to hold silence for the right reasons. Royce turned to David. You tell your mom. She didn't fail Ellie. No one did. We just lost the map. David nodded slowly and then instinctively, without asking, stepped forward and hugged the old Marine. It wasn't a performative hug. It wasn't soft. It was real, tight, honest. Royce didn't flinch. Inside the diner, Travis Kincaid had been watching it all unfold from behind the counter. His father's voice echoed in his head, those lessons about strength being about power, not apology. But the man in front of him had changed that. Royce had stood tall even when others tried to break him with laughter, and now that laughter haunted Travis like a sickness. Later that afternoon, while Royce had returned home, Travis quietly approached Lila. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She looked wary but nodded. "Do you think people like me get a second chance?" Lila studied him. "Not if you wait for permission, but if you show up every day, maybe." He didn't speak again. But later that week, a flyer appeared on the community board: "Veterans Eat Free every Friday." Sponsored by Harrison's Diner and community donations. There was no name attached. But Lana said the first $500 came in cash. From an envelope, no note, just a folded napkin that read, "To the ones we forgot." Now let me ask you this. Have you ever walked past someone like Royce? Have you ever heard someone laugh at the wrong moment and said nothing because silence too is a choice? If this story moved you, comment "I will remember" below. Not just for Royce, not just for Ellie, but for every name we never learned because we never asked. A week passed, then two, and on a windy Saturday morning at Huntington Memorial Park, a ceremony was held, not by the city, not by the mayor's office, but by students, veterans, and neighbors who had once looked away. Lila stood at the podium, voice steady but raw. "This man sat by a window for 9 years and no one asked him his name. I did, and because of that we now know the names of 3 other Marines who were never honored. Because of that we now know Ellie Torres didn't die forgotten. She died remembered by the man who wouldn't leave her behind." She stepped aside. Royce walked up. No prepared speech, no flash, just his hands weathered and honest, holding the signed sketch Lila had given him. "I've got nothing fancy to say," he began, "but I've learned that people don't need grand speeches. They just need to be seen. That's what that girl did. She saw me. She asked the right question, and I want to ask you all one back." He looked at the crowd. Veterans in uniform, kids in ROTC jackets, parents, grandparents. How many of you know the name of the veteran who bags your groceries or sweeps your church floor or sits alone at the diner every Thursday? No one answered, but no one looked away. Royce continued, "If we want a nation worth dying for, we better make it one worth living in when they come home." The crowd stood. That evening back at the diner, the wall of honor had grown. Photos appeared from dusty drawers and attics, old newspaper clippings, bronze buttons. One corner was filled with hand-scribbled stories, short notes, most unsigned. Just memories returned to where they belonged. And on the jukebox, the same soft instrumental played the Marine Corps hymn. But tonight, people listened. Royce sat in his usual booth. Across from him, Lila opened her sketchbook one last time. "I want to draw you," she said. He smiled. "You already did." This time she said, "I want to draw you now, not the past." She began to sketch, and as she did, a man in uniform walked in. Middle-aged, quiet, sat 2 tables away, said nothing, but when he finished his meal, he walked to the wall, placed a single photo, and whispered, "He was my uncle." Royce carried him out too. Royce nodded silently from his seat. One by one, people were remembering, not because someone demanded it, but because a kid asked. And now we'll ask you, will you remember too? Not just today, not just on Veterans Day, but every day someone walks into a room and says nothing carries weight you can't see and wears no medal on their chest. Because sometimes the most heroic thing a man does is endure. So, what would you have done in that diner? What will you do tomorrow? Comment. I will remember if this story changed the way you look at someone sitting alone. And if you believe stories like Royce's should never be forgotten, share this. Pass it forward. for Ellie, for Royce, for every name we didn't ask. Because remembering isn't history, it's honor.